that right now what is most important, you know, in terms of what we're preaching and pushing for the black preacher, would be things like the sanctity of marriage and this gay marriage debate back and forth, and that's what we ought to be preaching. What do you guys think? Where do you think we ought to be focusing our attention in terms of that prophetic voice and engaging society for the young preacher today?
Well, I have this this view. Let's put it this way. In the history of America, especially on the slave issue, Europeans in America supported slavery because they said that Jesus never said a word about it. And they said the Old Testament, in the Old Testament, Israel was involved in it. So they had slaves. Okay? And so therefore, if Jesus never said a word about it, it was good. Now, on the matter that the controversy, especially around Obama, you know, what he talked about in terms of gay, or I should say same-sex marriages, that is an issue, and for many Christians, they were taken aback by his position. For example, there are black preachers who have had some very, very strong words, you know, about that, saying, listen, that could not be. But here's the way that I approach this, you know, personally for myself. While Jesus may not have ever said anything about slavery, and the Old Testament supported it and all of that, we should not use the text in that way to support and not support things that we believe to be true or right or wrong. What we should see is the larger thrust of what is being said. And if you take Jesus himself, he was open to individuals who were very different. For instance, the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. It was a no-no. The man who was born blind, thought of as having sin, and Jesus about. Or you take, for example, the lepers. They had no business within the religious circle or the approved religious circle, and Jesus reached for them. I think in all of this that we ought to be extremely, that we in some sense embrace the ethic of love. Now, I have said personally that we black people should not have any qualms about so much that many other people have qualms about, because we were a disallowed people in this country. We were disallowed. And how can we be in the business of disallowing if we have been disallowed so much, you see? So, while I don't, this is really very controversial what I'm going to say now, but while I don't believe in what the Klan believes, I don't think that the Klan, they have a right to talk. Because in this country, I was never allowed to talk. Therefore, I cannot be in the business of disallowing other people. And I think that Jesus would have been open. He was open to the woman caught in adultery. He was open to a lot of things that the society and the church, you know, in the case of blind Bartimaeus, the church said no, correct? The disciples said, please shut up. Jesus said, let me stop here. Somebody is calling me, and I want to talk to this person. And I think that is God. Because when God sees our conditions, that we have messed it up real bad, even in case of the Jews in the Babylonian exile, they were there for 70 years. And one day the merciful God said, you deserve to be here, but because of my love for you, you can come back to me. And so the prophet Isaiah says, comfort ye, my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell her that the war is over, that she is paid doubly for her sins. The voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. You don't deserve it, but God allows it. I want to go on the side of God with all of the stuff that we are dealing with. That is my understanding of how God is depicted, you know, and even in my own personal experience, where I have been disallowed, and yet still God allowed me. And I just don't know about people who just always no to this and no to that and no to that. Not that you are supportive of something, but you ought to be tolerant. You there ought to be a spirit of toleration, you know, in the society.
I think the black church has always had within her walls the same issues and concerns of the larger and broader society. I also think that the black church needs to be skeptical about just joining a perspective or joining the bandwagon of American conservative evangelicals, no matter what that is, because in many ways these are the same people who not only sanction slavery, but they sanction a lot of the atrocities that have gone on in the United States. So we have to be very skeptical and very careful, I think, about that. I also think, you know, I've written a lot, and I continue to write about about issues of freedom. And I think that, I guess, you know, one of the latest things that I've written has to do with the theology of freedom. And I think that if we're going to talk about freedom and liberation, and if we're going to talk about the oppressed and so forth, and I know that there are a lot of people who don't like to compare the issue with gays and lesbians and same-sex marriages and so forth with the same issues that black people have struggled with historically and so forth. And I think that's a legitimate issue and a legitimate concern. But I think there's an overall issue and concern that Dr. Sanders probably hit on, which has to do with agape love, and much broader, the love of God, and so forth. And just dealing with the nature of humanity and human beings. And the fact that there is a sense of lack, you know, in all of us. And I think we have to be at least thoughtful and careful about any kind of blanket condemnation of people who are all God's people, you know, in the first place. These issues, you know, are political to some degree, the politicization of sexuality and human relationships and so forth. But there is nothing that people, particularly folk in the church, are any more concerned about condemning than something related to sex. You know, in some sense, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there is a high correlation, I think, in black religion and in the black church between sin and sex. I don't know where. I don't know what the origin of it is or where it, but I mean, that's where people, when you talk about sin in the black church, it's got to have something to do with sexuality or with sex. All kinds of other things, like, you know, when I talk about sin, I'm talking about, in a very real sense, a kind of distanciation or separation between us and God. And I'm also talking about issues of injustice and issues of fairness and those kinds of things. Those things to me are sinful. And those are the things that we need to be focusing on and addressing the most. As a matter of fact, you know, I'd rather for the black church particularly to be talking about something else other than same-sex marriage. I think there are some things that really should take priority over that. That is, from my perspective, issues of justice, fairness, issues of employment, black-on-black crime and violence, violence in the urban core areas, all of these kinds of things. You know, I think these are the kinds of things that we need to be concerned about and we need to be talking about. As you know, Josh, and Dr. Sanders as well, that at our church we have something that I started about 3 or 4 years ago now called a Black Love Festival. And I try to get black people to sign a love pledge to saying that they're going to pledge not to harm one another, not to kill one another, not to shoot one another, not to do anything that can be construed as negative against one another. So, you know, from that perspective, I'm saying, you know, if I could get black people to be more loving toward one another and to get themselves out of this self-hatred kind of mode and begin to focus on some bigger kinds of things. I think that's what we need to be talking about. I don't think that, you know, I mean, my position on all of this has really grown, I would say, over the past, 10 or 20 years or so. I probably was more of a conservative years ago, but as I've gotten older, I have become even more liberal in my thinking, particularly as it relates to tolerance and other kinds of things, which I also think these things are virtues. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, we do need to be broader in our perspective and more tolerant, and not just be condemnatory of the sexual practices of people. I think, you know, on the other side, when we still have, I think, just a dominant number of heterosexual marriages that are taking place, that are going on. And so I think these are things that like all marriages, that we can encourage and talk about, and without even condemning other people. I'd rather for folk to love each other than to kill each other. And I think the killing is something that we have had to deal with in the black community particularly. And if I could get black people to sign a pledge that they're going to love each other, in that sense, I don't care what kind of love it is, whether it's same sex or whatever. If they're going to just stop fighting and killing one another and advancing a sense of community and a sense of unity, I think that that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing.